are eradicated. So there are no more cases due to vaccines. And this is quite a graphic, and it really makes you think about how terrible the world would be without vaccines. But if we go a little bit further, here is a statistics I found on an article by Roman Bystrianek, and this was published. It was called Vaccine Nation, and it was a .org site, and he was talking about vaccines and how our perception of vaccines is not necessarily correct. So if you look here, here is the disease rates since 1900 to 1963. And if you notice that a lot of the diseases have gone down quite a bit, although you do have that one spike there, which was the flu pandemic in 1918. So as a whole, the amount of these common diseases, measles, scarlet fever, typhoid, whooping cough, these things have decreased over the years. And this is before vaccines were ever given. So let's look at a specific one here. For example, here is measles. In 1968, the measles vaccine was introduced. If you look at the amount of the diseases before the measles vaccine was introduced, directly before there, it's really quite a small amount of measles. So to say that vaccines decreased all this, you really can't say that because it had already decreased on its own quite a bit before the vaccine was introduced. So that graphic, let me go on one more time here. We have the whooping cough vaccine. You see the same thing happen here. The whooping cough vaccine was widespread in the 1950s, and by the time it was introduced, whooping cough was already fairly rare. So that graphic that showed the before and after, they're comparing the before vaccine era with the vaccine era. Whereas there's a problem with that because the vaccine era, gradually, the pre-vaccine era, the disease rates were already on a decrease by the time the vaccine era came around. So you could start anywhere in here in the pre-vaccine era and it would be greater, especially if you started earlier. And then you look at post-vaccine era and there's really no cases of diseases, but a lot of that happened naturally without the use of vaccines. Now, I'm not saying this because vaccines are ineffective. I'm just saying that the amount of success we give to vaccines may be greater than what it really is. Here is now the influenza vaccine. And if you look since 1960, here are the mortality rates due to the flu virus. And the blue line is the influenza vaccine coverage. So as vaccine coverage increases, you would generally think that the vaccine that the mortality rates due to the flu virus would decrease. But we see here that it really doesn't decrease, and it stays sort of around the middle line average. And this makes us really question whether or not the flu vaccine is even effective at all. So let me talk briefly about the flu vaccine and how it's made. There are different types of flu vaccines that are given. You have one type where the virus is killed, so essentially it cannot affect you. And this is given through a shot. And then you have a flu virus type that's actually a weakened virus. And so it is still active, but it's weakened. And it's hoped that your immune system will fight this off and build antibodies to this weakened virus, and you will not get the virus, the viral infection. So there are 3 viruses that are put in the flu vaccine. You have the influenza A, the H3N2. You have seasonal influenza A, the H1N1, which now protects against the swine flu. And then you have the influenza B virus. They don't really use the influenza C virus because it's not very extreme in the symptoms. And the seasonal influenza viruses are selected based on trends and forecasts. So it's looked at throughout the year. They monitor the progress in the flu virus. So look at the mutations, look at what's happening with the virus, and try to make a prediction based on the next year, on the likely virus to be spread around and be put into circulation. So the reason they have to start so early with that and looking at the virus that's actually going around is because of vaccine production. Many companies actually begin producing viral strains in January for delivery in the fall. And this is to create a supply that can actually meet the demands of the public. So you have a very large amount of vaccine that needs to be made, and you have to start early enough. And so many companies will start making several strains based on their own guesses of what the FDA will determine as the strain that will be put into the vaccines. Every country actually decides in and of itself what virus will be put into the vaccine. And in the United States, the FDA determines that. And then you have obviously the success of the vaccine depends on the match of the virus in the vaccine to the actual circulating virus. So if it's a good match, you are likely to get a lot of antibodies built up, and by the time the virus comes around, you will not be infected. But if it's not a good match, you may only have a little bit of immune system, and you may not have any at all. And there's actually side effects that have been noted to the flu virus, to the flu vaccine. Many of these are pain, where the injection site happens. You can have a fever, allergic reactions, and it's actually quite a few people actually get some sort of allergic reaction, but many are mild. So I want to look briefly at some statistics of the effects of flu vaccine. If you look here in the highlighted flu and pneumonia causes of death, it's only 148.5, and this is just a ratio here. And if you look at, and this is, I'm looking at over 75, 148.5, 65 is 36.3, 55 is 10.4. So you look, as the older you get, the ratio of flu deaths to other deaths increases dramatically. But you also look on the low end, and young children, obviously less than 1, are at a much higher rate, a much higher likelihood of dying from the flu and pneumonia. And heart disease, though, if you look at the comparison of flu and pneumonia to heart disease, you see that it's still much less. So really, the flu and pneumonia causes of death are not one of the major causes of death. So that's something also to keep into perspective when ordering, inoculation of mass population. So I want to read this statistic to you here. It's from a study done in 2005. It says, we attribute the decline in influenza-related mortality among people aged 65 to 74 years in the decade after the 1968 pandemic to the acquisition of immunity to the emerging H3N2 virus, and that's influenza type A virus. We could not correlate increasing vaccination coverage after 1980 with declining mortality rates in any age group, because fewer than 10% of all winter deaths were attributable to influenza in any season. We conclude that observational studies substantially overestimate vaccination benefit. So what they're basically saying is that what you saw there, that natural decrease, is what can be attributed to the decrease in death rate due to the flu. It's not the vaccine that's causing this, it's just a natural antibody buildup in our bodies to the vaccine. And they're saying this is especially relating to people aged 65 to 74 years old, because these are the people that are most likely to die if they have the flu virus. Most of us here, it's just a common cold. It's nothing that really affects us. And then we see here some articles. This was an article in 2008. Health experts guessed wrong on flu vaccine. And basically this article said that the experts guessed wrong and the flu vaccine really didn't prove to be of much benefit. Another article from USA Today, and it says that the flu vaccine barely worked in people 65 years and older, and this was published in February 21, 2013. So in 2013, they really did not have a good year for the flu vaccine. It really did not help things at all. And you see there on the bottom, you have for those 65 and older, it helped just 9% of cases. So only 9% of people 65 years and older had any benefit from the flu vaccine. And so this leads me to conclude that one-size-fits-all vaccine mandates do not recognize biodiversity and the fact that individuals have unique biological and genetic factors that can make them more or less susceptible to suffering a vaccine reaction, injury, and death. And this is from the National Vaccine Information Center. The National Vaccine Information Center does not advocate for or against the use of vaccines, but defends the ethical principle of informed consent to medical risk-taking, including the right for all Americans to make informed, voluntary decisions about vaccination for themselves or their children. We maintain that every individual has the human right to be informed about the risks and complications associated with infectious diseases and vaccines, and make a voluntary decision about whether or not to use every government-recommended vaccine, a few vaccines, or no vaccines at all. And this is my take on it, that each of us should make the decision based on the information around us, and none of us should be forced or suggested to take any of these vaccines.